Inside ADX Florence, America's worst maximum security prison. The arrival. You've never seen darkness like this. Subscribe now because what you're about to uncover inside ADX Florence, the most secure Supermax prison in America, will change how you think about justice. Before dawn on a winter morning, a convoy of black SUVs cut through the high desert of southern Colorado, headlights carving long beams across snow-crusted scrubland. In the center of the motorcade rolled a white Bureau of Prisons bus with its windows blacked out. Shackled inside was a man federal marshals called the Silent Engineer. His real name, Marcus Hale. Former government contractor turned whistleblower, or trafficker depending on which file you read. After a sensational trial over leaked security plans and allegations of aiding a cartel, Hale was sentenced to life without parole. Now he was headed to the one place designed to swallow men whole, the Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, ADX, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. The bus slowed as the prison rose from the plain like a fortress, layer upon layer of fencing, razor wire, and concrete. Even at a distance, the air around it seemed still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Hale peered through the narrow window slit, his eyes scanning the towers and cameras. Somewhere in those towers, lenses were already locked on him. Inside the control center, Associate Warden Karen Doyle watched the incoming feed. She had seen hundreds of arrivals, but this one was different. Hale had once worked on federal infrastructure contracts, including, she discovered only recently, some early-stage designs for ADX itself. He was no ordinary inmate. His knowledge of the prison's bones made her uneasy. As the bus passed through the Sally Port, the gates clanged shut with a reverberating thud. The convoy stopped at intake. Marshals led Hale off the bus in belly chains, wrists cuffed, ankle shackles clinking against the cold concrete floor. He moved without resistance, his breath visible in the frigid air. Cameras captured everything, their red lights blinking in unison. Inside the sterile intake room, staff cataloged Hale's belongings. One envelope of legal papers, a pair of reading glasses, a copy of a 1996 engineering journal with highlighted passages. A nurse checked his vitals. Officers spoke in clipped tones, never using his name, only his number. ADX was built for sensory deprivation. The process began at the door. Across the country, news outlets were already running segments. Security breach contractors sent to ADX. Commentators speculated about hidden data caches and uncharged conspirators. Hale had maintained he was a scapegoat for a program gone wrong, but the jury hadn't believed him. Now, inside the most restrictive prison in America, no one would hear him at all. Warden Doyle convened an emergency meeting with her Special Investigative Services team. "I want every inch of his cell swept," she ordered. "No privileges beyond policy. And pull the old blueprints from archives. I need to know exactly what he knows." Agents exchanged worried looks. The blueprints were classified, but Doyle's gut told her Hale still had pieces of them hidden somewhere. "If he thinks he can manipulate this place from the inside," she said, "he's wrong." In Hale's assigned cell, a gray box measuring 7 by 12 feet, everything was bolted down. Concrete bed, concrete desk, a steel toilet sink combo, a narrow slit of reinforced glass for daylight. The TV mounted high on the wall looped a federal channel of muted programming. He sat on the bed, staring at the floor, his fingers tracing invisible lines on the concrete. 2 days later, during routine mail inspection, officers intercepted an envelope addressed to Hale from an engineering society. Inside was a single sheet of graph paper covered in what looked like random dots and lines. Forensic staff scanned it under UV light and found faint annotations resembling coordinates. They flagged it for Doyle, who ordered the mail held back. But when staff entered Hale's cell to deliver dinner, they found an identical sheet already on his desk. That night, Hale refused his meal. He sat cross-legged on the floor, whispering something under his breath. The camera's audio picked up fragments: foundation, access, phase. The officer on duty noted it in the logbook but didn't raise an alert. ADX logs are full of inmate mutterings. No one realized these were blueprints in his mind. In Washington, a young Department of Justice analyst named Claire Monroe had been following the case since trial. She'd noticed anomalies in sealed filings, references to Phase 2, and unmapped corridors. She had also seen Hale's name on early ADX contract documents. When she heard of his transfer, her instincts screamed that the story wasn't over. She filed an internal request to review his incoming and outgoing mail but was denied. "Case closed," her supervisor said. She wasn't so sure. By the end of Hale's first week, subtle irregularities began to emerge. A sensor offline in an unused maintenance area, a missing inventory item from the mail room, an unexplained spike in encrypted traffic detected by an outside agency. Each was small, but together they formed a pattern, one only Claire seemed to recognize. On the seventh night, a blizzard blew across the Rockies, blanketing ADX in snow. Power flickered for 3 seconds. Backup generators kicked in. When the lights returned, the control room noticed a single door in an old service corridor had cycled open for exactly 4 seconds before sealing again. No one was scheduled to be there. Cameras showed nothing but empty concrete. At dawn, Officer Harris conducted a surprise search of Hale's cell. Under the thin mattress he found a thumb-sized piece of concrete neatly carved out, exposing a fiber optic line. Next to it lay a folded sheet of graph paper with new coordinates. Harris swore and called his supervisor. "We've got a problem," he said. "He's doing something in here." Hale looked up from the floor, eyes calm, and said only one sentence: "Every fortress has a fault line." The officers sealed the cell, moved him to a holding room and alerted Washington. Claire's phone rang with the update just as she opened an unmarked envelope on her desk. Inside was a Polaroid photograph of the ADX perimeter taken from an angle only staff could access. On the back in block letters were 3 words: "Check the foundation. Fault lines." Snow swirled like static against the perimeter lights as ADX slammed into full lockdown. Sirens echoed down the concrete hallways, red strobes flashing over sealed cell doors. In the control room, Warden Doyle leaned over a bank of monitors, her knuckles white. "We've got an active breach of procedure," she said. "Lock every level. Nobody moves without my say." Officers scrambled to comply, but on one screen a sensor in the sub-basement still blinked amber, offline. Down in a holding room, Marcus Hale sat cuffed to a bolted chair. He stared at the floor as 2 special investigative officers questioned him about the fiber optic line he'd exposed. "How did you know that cable was there?" one demanded. Hale lifted his eyes slowly. "I helped build this place," he said, his voice steady. "You think you know its guts, but you don't." The officer slammed a folder shut. "Then tell us where the weak spots are." Hale's faint smile chilled him more than a threat ever could. Across the country in Washington, Claire Monroe dropped the Polaroid on her desk and opened a map of the ADX complex. The coordinates she'd pulled from Hale's intercepted mail matched an area labeled Foundation Access, a sealed maintenance corridor left over from the original build. She called a contact in the FBI's Denver field office. "He's not trying to get out," she said urgently. "He's trying to reach something buried under the prison." Her contact promised to send a team but warned her, "If you're right, it's bigger than a breach. It's an operation." Inside ADX, Lieutenant Harris and 2 officers geared up and headed to the old maintenance shed outside the secure perimeter. The lock on its door was new but the hinges rusted. Harris cut it and pushed inside. Dust and cobwebs coated piles of old wire spools. In one corner, fresh footprints led to a trapdoor. He crouched, heart hammering, and lifted it. A narrow tunnel dropped into darkness, new concrete blending into old. "Dispatch, we've got an unauthorized tunnel," he said into his radio. Static hissed back. He tried again. Nothing. The storm overhead was scrambling their signal. He clicked on his flashlight and descended, the others following. The air below smelled of damp earth and ozone. Cables snaked along the walls. At the far end of the tunnel, a faint green light blinked from a relay box wired into the prison's fiber line. Miles away, Claire's phone buzzed. Her FBI contact had just emailed a classified file, an early-stage ADX blueprint marked Reeves Engineering. Her stomach dropped. Hale hadn't been lying. He had worked on the very corridors he was now accessing. "He's not an inmate with a plan," she murmured. "He's an architect finishing a job." In the tunnel, Harris reached for the relay box. A voice came through his radio, low and clear. "Lieutenant Harris. Step away from the line." Harris spun around. The tunnel was empty except for his men. "Where are you?" he barked. The voice chuckled softly. "Inside. Where else?" Back upstairs in the holding room, Hale's lips moved in perfect sync with the radio transmission. The guard beside him felt the hair rise on his arms. "How is he?" he began, but Hale opened his eyes and said aloud, "Every fortress has a fault line. You just found mine." Harris backed away from the relay. "We're leaving," he told his team. They scrambled up the ladder to the shed and slammed the trapdoor shut just as a tremor rattled the floor. Snow gusted in as they stumbled into the cold night. Harris keyed his emergency beacon. "We've got something under here," he gasped. "Get me a full sweep team now." Claire slammed her laptop shut, grabbed her badge and booked the next flight to Denver. She couldn't trust the warning to travel up the chain. By the time the bureau processed it, Hale might already have whatever he was after. Back at ADX, Warden Doyle convened an emergency call with her superiors. "He's been inside a week," she said. "He's already found a way to reach our foundation lines. If he's building a backdoor, we could lose control of communications, surveillance, everything." On the other end, a deputy director barked back, "Then shut it down. Isolate him completely." But even as she spoke, a new alert flashed on the control room screens. A door in H unit had opened for 4 seconds with no authorization, and a small envelope had been slid through Hale's slot. Cameras caught it but not the hand that delivered it. Hale tore the envelope open with a practiced motion and read the single sentence inside. He burned it to ash in his sink, then sat cross-legged on the floor. "Phase 3 at dawn," he whispered. That night, Harris pored over the coordinates from Hale's blueprint. They marked a point directly under the main administration wing, a sealed chamber left from the original construction, never logged in the prison's official plans. He felt his throat go dry. If someone could access that space and tap the fiber trunks, they could intercept or leak everything. At 3:11 a.m., an internal alarm tripped. Fiber optic breach in sublevel C. Cameras flickered. Monitors in the control room showed a heat signature moving through the sealed maintenance tunnel, coming from a direction no one had ever mapped. Doyle grabbed the intercom. "All units, prepare for breach protocol. We've got movement in the foundation." Snow hammered the windows as dawn approached. In his cell, Marcus Hale whispered to himself, eyes closed as if reciting a blueprint from memory. In D.C., Claire stared at a satellite image of ADX on her phone as her plane lifted off. "What are you building, Marcus?" she whispered. As the first rays of sun hit the Rockies, a low rumble vibrated through the prison's subbasement. Monitors flickered. Harris looked at the control room screens and saw something that made his blood run cold. A glowing heat signature moving steadily toward the administration wing, from inside a sealed chamber no one was supposed to know existed. The architect's files. The heat signature crept closer to the administration wing, blinking on Harris's monitor like a heartbeat. Officers in body armor lined the corridor above, weapons lowered but trembling. Warden Doyle's voice cut through the control room. "Find him. Find out what he's doing." But the sealed chamber under their feet had never existed on official plans. There was no key, no door, only a thin seam in the concrete. Down in H unit, Marcus Hale sat on his bed, eyes closed, lips moving silently. To any observer he looked like a man meditating. In reality, every movement of his fingers mapped invisible lines on the air, the hidden arteries he'd built into ADX years before. His breathing slowed as the storm outside deepened. At the other end of the country, Claire Monroe's plane touched down in Denver. She had spent the entire flight reading through contractor invoices, emails, and court filings. Every breadcrumb pointed to the same conclusion. During early phases of ADX construction, Hale's company had been allowed to value engineer service corridors no one had inspected since. On paper they were dead ends. In reality they were a buried nervous system. By the time she reached Florence, tactical teams had pried open the seam in the subbasement. Behind it was a narrow stair leading to a small, perfectly square chamber, smooth concrete walls, a single bulb overhead, and a rack of servers humming quietly. Thick cables from the prison's fiber trunk fed into them. And at the far end, standing calmly with his hands at his sides, was Marcus Hale. "You found it," he said softly as Harris and his team burst in. "Took you long enough. Hands where I can see them." Harris barked. Hale complied, raising his arms. Claire arrived moments later, breathless, badge in hand. She stepped past the line of officers. "Marcus, what's on those servers?" Hale's eyes flicked to hers. "Every dirty secret this place has tried to bury. Excessive force reports. Indefinite solitary logs. Hunger strike suppression tactics. Illegal mail interceptions. All of it." He nodded at the cables. "It's already transmitting out. You can't stop it." "No one will believe you," Doyle snapped from the doorway. Hale tilted his head. "Check your phones." One by one, devices buzzed. An email with the subject line, "Inside ADX." Exposed landed in inboxes across Washington and New York. Attached were gigabytes of files, architectural diagrams, court-sealed photos, internal memos. The Alcatraz of the Rockies had just been turned inside out. Claire stepped closer, voice low. "Why me? Why send me the blueprints?" Hale smiled faintly. "Because you were the only one reading between the lines. I built fault lines into this place. You were mine on the outside. Officers moved in, cuffing him. He didn't resist. Every fortress has a fault line, he murmured again. Sometimes it's a corridor. Sometimes it's a person. Upstairs, screens filled with breaking news banners. Leaked files expose America's harshest prison. Congressional hearings were called within days. Civil rights lawyers prepared new lawsuits. Warden Doyle was placed on administrative leave. Harris stared at the monitors long after the cell block had gone quiet, whispering to himself, "What did we just unleash?" Hale was transferred to an undisclosed location, no public record of where. Official statements claimed the leak was under investigation. But 3 months later, an unmarked envelope landed on Claire Monroe's desk. Inside was a fresh blueprint of a facility she didn't recognize, with a single sentence at the bottom. Phase 4 begins soon. She looked out the window at the Capitol dome, the paper trembling in her hands. Somewhere, someone was already building the next foundation. If you thought this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe so you don't miss it.